So we're going to begin with responsive reading today. And if you would please turn to responsive reading number 439 in your gray books. So how this works is that I will read the line in regular print and you will respond with the line in the italics. And it's a community sharing a shared voice between all of us. The reading is called We Gather in Reverence. We gather in reverence before the wonder of life.
The wonder of this moment.
The wonder of being together, so close yet so apart.
Each hidden in our own secret chamber.
Each listening, each trying to speak.
Yet none fully understanding, none fully understood.
We gather in reverence before all intangible things that eyes see not, nor ears can detect.
That hands cannot touch, that space cannot hold, and time cannot measure.
Thank you. So I'm Maria Zayas, and I enjoyed the introduction to our topic today, which is on the unseen and the intangible. So these topics of the unseen and the intangible, they really pique my interest. As a scientist, a psychologist, I definitely am a proponent of trying to understand phenomena using scientific rigor and quantifiable measures. So the idea of the unseen strikes a chord of concern in me. However, at the same time, as a person, and I would say as a mystic, I'm also interested in finding ways to let what seem very different realities coexist and harmonize in our own perceptions and experience. So there are these two different realities that seem somehow inconsistent. So this matter of coexisting realities makes me think of a term. This is where I went in my thinking as I was considering these apparent inconsistencies. And the word that came to me is a word some of you may know. It is liminal. Liminal, L-I-M-I-N-A-L. And the word stems from the Latin word limen, L-I-M-E, which means threshold. So apparently threshold is going to be important for us here. So I pursued this a little bit more, and I found that the Cambridge Dictionary defines liminal in this way: between or belonging to two different states. The liminal state between waking and sleeping, for example. It's a kind of threshold. So threshold is an important topic in this conversation. So by extension, in this matter of threshold, this term has also been used to describe what seem like trance-like experiences that sometimes occur in relationships, where there's a deep connection that bridges the gap between two people. Two people who by nature are quite different. They're in different places, and yet they're connecting. So there must be some kind of connecting substance. We're calling it a threshold. This happens not just between people, but sometimes it may happen between you and your pet, your animal, your dog, your cat, your horse. And something meaningful happens in that interaction. Even though these are very different beings, very different places and experiences, something actually happens in that connection. So another way that the term liminal has been used is to speak about the experience of worship. like what we are doing here. So worship, as you know, can be an experience of transformation. That means we move from one place to another. We embrace different realities, and there's something that connects those. There's a transformative process. One of the ways that that has been symbolized is through a labyrinth. So some of you may be familiar with the labyrinth in the Cathedral of Chartres in France. It's one of the biggest labyrinths in the world. And people often go walk labyrinths as a form of meditation, as a transformative process. It captures in words what it captures in symbol what we cannot capture in words. Something that begins in one place and takes you to another place without really understanding what happened. There's an invisible, intangible component here that takes us from one state of consciousness to another. So we may not understand what happened, but we do know that it was meaningful and transformative. This can happen when we are in a state of reverence and focus, whether it's in a place of worship, whether it's in communion in our relationships with the other humans in our life, or with animals, or with nature. So oftentimes these places of worship, these places of connection with other species, and even humans, which sometimes feel like other species, they are usually fairly dimly lit. It's hard sometimes to see exactly what's going on there. We know something's happening, but we can't always see what it is. And yet, even though we can't put our finger on it, these experiences are life-changing. Something happens between us when we cross over that threshold of difference, of unseen things that can change our life. It can even leave us sort of speechless. Like, I don't know what just happened there, but something happened. I don't know if you've ever had that experience. Something just happened here. Reminds me of Richard Dreyfuss in the movie Close Encounters. Remember when he makes the mound with potatoes and all kinds of other things, and he's just kind of staring at it. Something is happening in that crossover point, and he says, "This must mean something." So I ask the question, what does it mean? What is important to us to understand about these unseen things that are powerful, and yet we can't touch, we can't put our fingers on, we can't see them sometimes. So as Donna was saying, one way that people sometimes have used to identify these kinds of experiences of the unseen and yet a deep connection is spirit or spiritual. And so that can cause some issues in cultures that are very scientifically minded. When you bring up words like spirit or spiritual, there's a concern about not knowing what that is, about how to define it, about how to measure it. And sometimes it might make people a little bit nervous. It might make people nervous enough that they kind of distance themselves from the invisible spaces, choosing instead to live in the kind of bright neon light of the everyday. So I want to find out what happens if we do that. What happens if we dismiss things that we can't see because we don't have a way of naming them, because we don't have a way of identifying them or measuring them? Do we lose something important there? So I want to read a quote to you that is from a Dr. Christina Prochalski. So Charlotte gave me the name of Dr. Prochalski after I spoke to Charlotte in that service where we considered where UU is going from here on. What's the future of UU? And we talked about the mental and we talked about the emotional, but nobody talked about spirit or the spiritual. Of course, I asked that question, what about the spiritual? And there wasn't really much to say on that. So I talked to Charlotte about it afterwards, and she said, go ahead and read the work of Dr. Przalski. So Dr. Przalski is she is the director of the George Washington Institute for Spirituality and Health, and professor of medicine at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and Charlotte's studies in medical chaplaincy were very heavily informed by the work of Dr. Przalski. So she says, the concept of spirituality is found in all cultures and societies. It is expressed in an individual's search for ultimate meaning through participation in religion and/or belief in God, family, naturalism, rationalism, humanism, and the arts. All of these factors can influence how patients and healthcare professionals perceive health and illness and how they interact with one another. Spirituality is the basis for the deep, caring connections physicians and healthcare professionals form with their patients. While cure may result from technical and disease-oriented care, healing occurs within the context of the caring connection patients form with their physicians and healthcare professionals. This is why spirituality is essential to all of medicine and healthcare. So I thought that was a really beautiful way of bringing together what appear to be very different realities, of joining through that threshold of connection. And in following Dr. Przalski's thought on that, I followed the train of thought about relationship and connection to see what is held inside of relationship and connection that is meaningful to us, that we might somehow overlook if we are unable to find the comfort to take these things to heart very deeply. And I don't mean that we don't value relationship. I mean something very deep that happens in relationship that sometimes we don't pay attention to because we're running around life trying to do things that are more physical and more visible. And yet something is happening that we are not allowing to enter into us and to inform us and to provide a basis for the way that we live life and to allow that transformative process of healing to occur. So in thinking about that, I was reminded of the movie Contact. Did anybody see that? Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey. So that's one of my favorite movies, and there are lots of places in that movie that are very significant. But the part that I really wanted to focus on today is the part after, I don't want to spoil it for all of you if you haven't seen the movie, but let's just say that this is a movie about a man of the cloth and a scientist and extraterrestrials. It's very interesting and it's very rich. And so the character that Jodie Foster plays, Dr. Arroway, that's her name, right? Dr. Arroway. So Dr. Arroway has this very powerful experience that is transcendent. She can't put her finger on it. She doesn't really even know what happened. She doesn't have words for it. She doesn't have any instruments that picked up what she feels happened. It's like something happened that changed her life, but there's no record of it. It can't be seen and it can't be measured. So you can imagine in the scientific community, this did not go over well. So Dr. Arroway was questioned and challenged by the scientific community. And it caused a good deal of pain for her. It made her question her own perceptions and the reality of the depth of that experience of connection that was deep inside her heart. She knew it was there. She just couldn't explain it, couldn't see it, couldn't name it, there was no record that it had occurred. And yet, it not only lived in her heart, but it transformed life, and it reached across galaxies. I'll let you watch the movie so you can see what that was all about. So I want to ask, what kinds of instruments are inside of us that maybe capture or don't capture these deep things that happen within us that we cannot see? So I'm using the term instrument lightly, not as a physical device, but as an instrument of perception inside of ourselves. The things beyond our eyes and ears and touch, the things that allow us to touch into these unseen and intangible areas. So do we have those instruments, and are they working? Because if they're not working, then we're missing a lot. We're missing the magic of life that is in these unseen places, and because we don't have a way to register that, it just sort of escapes our consciousness. And we wind up in the same kind of day-to-day mundane life of things that we can see. So this is very concerning to me about humanity in general. We're not doing all that well as a human race, I would say. I would say we're probably missing something. And I wonder if we're missing something because we're not looking in the deeper places. We're just looking at those outer, everyday little things, like what time we need to get up, when's the coffee ready, how's the traffic for work, did I get all my things done, and what do I have to make for dinner? Those are important, but they don't capture the degree of depth that is transformative, that these deeper liminal spaces can capture and carry. So it's interesting that there are actually branches of science that have started to ask this question. So I've mentioned to you in the past, in a couple of different settings, that one of the things I do in my work is to study the science of the Heart Math Institute in Northern California. They've been studying what happens in our heart, not just the physical heart, not just as a pump of blood, but the heart as a mechanism of communication, a mechanism of sensation. And what they have found is that, so I'm going to get a little scientific here, and I hope that I'm not going too far off the deep end with you. So the heart produces electromagnetic waves. Nod if you understand that. So there are instruments in science that actually measure electromagnetic waves. They measure them for other things like rocks and buildings and things. And these instruments are called magnetometers because they measure electromagnetic waves. So the scientists have used these magnetometers to measure the electromagnetic waves that emanate from our heart. And guess what? They look like something. They actually have a form. It's called a double torus. And it looks a lot like what a celestial body looks like a black hole, for instance, where there are lines, electromagnetic lines that emanate from the center, and then there's energy that shoots up the top and the bottom. It's amazing. That's what we look like electromagnetically. So that's pretty unseen. And yet it's there. We can see it with the right instrument. Now the other thing that's mind-blowing about this is that these electromagnetic waves, they actually extend about 3 feet beyond our physical bodies. So, and I'm not talking about auras or some kind of woo-woo thing, things that sometimes people consider woo-woo, not everyone. But this is hard science. This is measurable. It looks like this and it extends that way. So what does that mean? So it means, for one, that right now all of you are in each other's electromagnetic wave. So, no, you didn't give permission. but you kind of did by being here. So everybody is in communication. How many of you knew you weren't communicating with each other with electromagnetic waves? Oh, okay, all right. We had a few people. Most people didn't know we were communicating with one another through electromagnetic waves. We thought we were just talking or prodding or something. So it turns out we communicate in all kinds of other invisible and unseen ways. And what we communicate has to do with the state of our heart. So the heart is putting out this message with electromagnetic waves. And what our heart is feeling, the emotion in our heart, actually creates a specific shape of the waves. So, okay, I hope I'm not going to blow anybody's mind here, but every emotion that we have has a shape in electromagnetic waves. So these scientists who know about this, they can tell you how you're feeling by looking at the shape of your wave when they hook you up to read your heart measurements. And so it's not surprising that when you have positive emotions like love or compassion or peace or care, your heart waves look nice and even, kind of like sine wave. However, when you feel angry or hateful or anxious or any of those what we call negative emotions, it's not nice and even like that. It looks kind of like this. And that's how we feel when we have those negative emotions. Now, those things actually travel through the electromagnetic waves of our bodies because these waves, they carry what we call biorelevant information. That means it's relevant to our biological survival. It's very adaptive for people to know what's going on in their environment so that they can survive. So for instance, have you ever walked into a room not knowing what was going on there, not knowing the people, not hearing what they were saying, and did you have a certain feeling? Yeah, I see some nods. So maybe you felt like, oh, this is good, this is a place I want to be. Or maybe you felt, I don't really want to be there. So I don't know why, I can't see anything, and maybe I'm crazy, but I just don't want to be there. So you're actually not crazy. What's happening is that you are touching into the information coming through the electromagnetic waves of others. And it is providing biorelevant information, which tells you it's okay to stay or it's not okay to stay. So I would propose that this is actually an instrument that we possess. It's a tool that we don't necessarily know how to use very well. But it is something that we can develop and that we can use in order to tap into that unseen place of connection. That's where things happen in the human world. It happens in the connection. As Donna so beautifully started our hour today with having us touch each other physically, there are many other ways that we touch one another. And there is a rich possibility and potential for our connectivity, which actually allows us to have access into information that we can use to make better decisions, like whether you should go into a room or not. But it expands even beyond that, to make good decisions about our world that so sorely needs good decisions, so sorely needs us to sense one another and to be clear on what's happening in our joint communal space. So what's really important about this is that in order for us to use these instruments that are within us, we need to be in a nice, stable place. If we're like this, it's like static. We just can't read what's going on. And that kind of static is created by our negative thoughts, our emotions that often come from an experience of stress. So anybody here have any stress? So stress can make you a little jumpy and jittery, yes? Kind of like you had too much coffee, maybe? So it actually generates static in your system. It gets in the way of reading and transmitting clear messages through that instrument of your electromagnetic waves. It's very important for us if we want to have clear communications, and access to this information, to have these positive emotions of love and compassion and care. And I know we all say, oh yes, we do that. But actually, I would challenge that we do that most of the time, because the research, and of course as a scientist I know research doesn't lie, the research says that most people are stressed most of the time. Even if you don't know it, you may acclimate to your level of stress. And so most of the time, probably you're like this, and you don't even know it. That means you can't pick up what you need to pick up, and you can't convey what you need to convey that's important for not only a quality experience and well-being, but actually, I think at this point, we're talking about the survival of the species. So this is important. And there are actually ways to increase that functioning of that instrument. These are the things that the HeartMath system works on to improve the clarity of your receptive and expressive instrument of your heart. So I thought I would end our little time together here with a very short exercise with a tool that HeartMath uses. It's the very basic tool that precedes every other tool to get you synchronized, so that you can be synchronized in yourself and synchronized with one another. And this is called heart-focused breathing. And so it's only going to take a minute, and you can leave your eyes open or close them. It's up to you. But I would say just, if you can, uncross your legs, because that allows more of the blood to come into your heart and gives us a clear access to that. And so I'm going to lead you through a little breathing exercise. So this begins with you imagining that your breath is coming in and out through your heart. Even though we know it isn't, when you imagine something, it tells your body that you want to focus there. It tells your brain to pay attention. So just imagine that your breath is flowing through your heart. And let yourself breathe easily, in and out. There's no need for any kind of special breathing. When you feel connected to your heart, I would invite you to activate a positive emotion. Bring that into your heart and into your body, as if you were really, really feeling it, not just thinking it. You might bring into your awareness the love you have for a family member or a pet, or gratitude for the blessings in your life, and compassion for a friend in suffering. Let yourself just feel that very deeply in your entire being. And just gently come out of that space. And just take inventory and see how you're feeling. The room feels a little calmer to me. So I would like to close our time together with this knowing that there is something very simple that we all can do to increase this communication and bridge the gap between these apparently inconsistent realities of human versus human, or human versus nature. There's always that versus that divides and fragments us. And it is only so because we cannot perceive the connecting threads that exist. Thank you.